Good evening and welcome to this broadcast of Let's Talk About It. Let's pray and we'll get started. Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for the opportunity to come and together and to share such a information on such a sensitive subject. We thank you that everything that's done and said will honor you and bring you glory and bring clarity to this subject. And we just lift this night up to you and give you glory for it in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, again, welcome, and we have our special guest. I will introduce them to you. We have Brandy Greer over here to my left. Brandy, wave at us here. That's Brandy, and beside Brandy, we have Lee Gant, and they're both from Burke Recovery. And as always, we have Doctor and Pastor of New Day Christian Church, Pastor George Logan. So welcome to everyone.
Thank you.
And so we talked about this being a sensitive subject for many, and tonight we're talking about unmasking addiction. So when we say unmasking addiction, what is that all about? So let's talk about it. So first of all, ladies, you are with Burke Recovery, so tell us about Burke Recovery. What is that exactly?
Okay, so Burke Recovery is a local nonprofit here in Burke County. We've been here for 56 years. We are a substance use treatment facility. We serve adolescents as well as adults. We also handle the JCPC crowd, which is our justice-involved youth. We do federal probation clients, drug screens, individual counseling, group counseling, you name it. That is our clinical side, and then upstairs we have our community outreach and prevention side. That is where we go out and do trainings and provide education and information. Anywhere folks will let us come, try to raise awareness about the dangers of substance use in the community, and then also we are in the schools teaching prevention.
Okay, all right. Now, Pastor George, you came to me. We had a health fair here, and you met these ladies here, and you told me to go in and talk with them because you wanted to have them on this broadcast. So what made you decide to say, you know what, we really need to have them here?
Well, first of all, it's a subject I don't know a lot about personally, but I know it's prevalent in our society, and I think as a ministry, we need to know how to minister to everyone, and that would be people who are addicted to whatever, you know. And so when I saw Burke Recovery and just thinking about things that I'd seen or heard, and seeing how prevalent just the usage of marijuana is today, and just seeing how people are what's the word I'm looking for? It's medicating themselves, you know, through marijuana usage, legal and illegal. And I guess it struck me. Now, my wife and I, we have a thing that as we go down the road now, we feel like we smell it everywhere, like coming out of cars, out the back pipes of things, just everywhere. It just seems so very prevalent. And within our community, there's so many people that are using something. And I can remember an experience I had up in Washington, D.C. on a trip there. And I was at a hotel, and I was sitting there waiting for my wife. She was at a conference. And I remember just like cars, and then a taxi cab came by, and the smoke from this taxi cab from the use of marijuana, it just came out and just hit me. And I'm having a cup of coffee, and I could smell it. And I guess I should have been more like, yeah, this is just normal. But it wasn't normal for me. And then the more I walked around D.C., the more I smelled marijuana, until I asked someone, I said, why is it that I'm smelling marijuana all the time? And they said, well, it's legal. It's legal in the District of Columbia. And that just hit me, you know, if it's legal in the District of Columbia, then it will eventually be legal everywhere for practical usage and for, you know, abuse. And so that's really, and having people come to me and sharing with me their own, you know, woes with their own children in regards to the use of marijuana.
Okay. Well, you said that it seems like a lot of people are using something. And so we talked about substance abuse. So when we talk about substance abuse, what exactly are we talking about when we say substance abuse? What is that exactly?
The answer. I think when we get into the discussion about substance use and substance abuse, we should go ahead and make the differences that there is substance use, There's folks who are just experimenting. There are folks who use things socially, both legal and illegal substances, and everything's a substance if it alters your mind, right? If it changes the physiology in your body. Even though we don't think about that. So like coffee, for example, probably the most widely used stimulant in the United States, and folks are addicted to it. So we can use a substance or we can misuse a substance. And that often comes in folks who maybe become dependent. If you have chronic pain and you take a medication and you can't not take that medication, you become dependent on it, but you may not be misusing it. At some point in time, if you're prone to that, maybe you start taking 2 every 4 to 6 hours, or you start using a different method of delivery to get that medication in your system. Well, at that point, you're abusing it. So there are a couple of different levels there, but when a person becomes addicted to a substance, kind of takes over, hijacks that pleasure pathway in the brain, and becomes more important than most anything else that they experience daily.
Okay, and Lee, I know Brandy just mentioned coffee, but what are some other things when we say substance abuse? Can you name some things perhaps that maybe some we don't even think of, but maybe some that are obvious that would be considered substance abuse or use?
Yes, so there's a lot actually out there. So the most thing prevalent here in Burke County, I would think, would be heroin or methamphetamine use. For adults, yeah. With the teenagers, I was getting ready to say youth, we try to stay away from kids. It would be vaping, of course, so the nicotine in vaping. And we have learned that cocaine is making a comeback in Burke County high schools. And I would also say that inhalants are on the rise. That is something that is not usually discussed. Kids don't ever think about, well, if I'm huffing gas or a Sharpie marker or cement glue or anything like that, that it could be changing the way my brain works, because their brains are not fully developed till they're 25, 26 years old. And we tell them that, but they don't ever stop and think, maybe that could chemically alter just huffing on some gasoline.
Okay, and we've heard of heroin or cocaine, and we know what gas is, but now you mentioned vaping. For some who may be in the more mature or older generation, and what is vaping exactly? Can you tell us what that is? Because that is a huge problem here in our county.
So I would say it's basically like the new technology of smoking a cigarette. It's just a different method of delivery, but we tend to say vaping when we're actually talking about the nicotine is the addictive substance in it.
Okay, and with the vaping, the cloud of smoke that comes out, if you smell it, I mean, it's cherry and grape and strawberry and pina colada, those kinds of smells come out, so it's supposedly more innocent, I guess, as some would see it. Well, and let me ask you ladies this. Why are you involved in this area of work, this line of work?
For myself personally, I'm in recovery. I spent about 15 years in active addiction. This is my 19th year in recovery. So I've finally got more time using my brain the right way than I did before. But my little brother, he's 19, he died of an overdose. My father committed suicide by overdose. My family's just inundated with it. Friends, especially the last 5 or 7 years, I've probably lost 17 or 18 close friends, people I ran with in school, people that I, played sports with, who have succumbed to addiction and ultimately lost their lives. And then many, many more who are suffering every day because it's controlling their lives. They're a slave to their addiction.
May I ask you a question? I appreciate your transparency. Can you speak to how that journey began for you? Like, what was the beginning stages of that for you?
Sure, I'd love to.
Yeah.
So I was in a very abusive relationship, and we both abused drugs also. And the Lord blessed me. I might get emotional, try not to. The Lord blessed me with a daughter, and she was like the coolest thing I had ever seen before in my life. And didn't want her to grow up and accept the kind of treatment that I was accepting. Didn't want her to wake up every day trying to get a fix, living for something that wasn't doing anything for her but killing her. Didn't want her to experience that. So I finally left the situation I was in. We moved to a battered women's shelter, and we had to go to church. So I went on Halloween night to a church service, and you had free food. So if you get the hot dogs and stuff you get, but you had to listen to the sermon first, right? And I was like, hey, it's free food. I'll listen to whatever you want me to hear. I didn't know the Lord. I knew what church was. I knew what Easter and Christmas were. But the pastor gave a message that touched my heart. When we closed our eyes and he asked us to give our heart to the Lord, I did. And, raised my hand, quietly with everybody else's head down because I didn't want to be embarrassed. And after that, he said, all right, if you raised your hand, I want you to come up here and profess your salvation. I was like, I'm not doing that. I barely got my hand up. And I didn't know Scripture. And God spoke to me audibly, and he said, if you deny me in front of your friends, I'll deny you in front of my Father. And I didn't even know that was Scripture until weeks later when I talked to my grandmother about the changes that were happening in my life. And she said, oh, that's right out of the Bible. And I said, well, it's what he told me. And my daughter is the reason I started to make a change, and God is how I have maintained that change throughout this.
Praise God.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Brandy, let me ask you about something you said earlier. First of all, so we talked about vaping, we talked about marijuana. How does one usually get started? We hear about gateway drugs. Like, is it by yourself? Is it usually with friends? How does that all happen? And Brandy or Lee can speak to that. Either one.
So we found that usually it's through older siblings or friends or parents. That is actually one of the reasons that we have one of our medication lock boxes that looks like a really soft pouch for parents to lock up their vapes. Because kids, they already think nothing's going to happen to them because they're at home, they're seeing their parents doing this vaping, their friends, their older siblings. They look at us when we tell them these health effects and conditions that come along with it, and they're like, that ain't happening here. I've never seen that. Y'all are just saying that. You're just trying to scare us. And the true fact is, we tell them all the time, guys, vaping is so new, we don't know what the outcome's going to be. I mean, we're just now, you're 50, 60 years into cigarettes being out. You know the studies behind it. You know the lung disease and everything that's COPD, all the health concerns with it. You don't with vaping. You guys are the guinea pigs. When you're our age, that's when we're going to really know the studies behind it. So every one of y'all that they get hooked on the nicotine in the vapes, they have a customer for life. They don't have to worry about you going nowhere.
I try to express to them also, because young people, because they will get mad at you if you call them kids, they think they know more than everybody else. A lot of times that's what we experience, and I have teenagers. He's way smarter than me. But we want them to know that the industry is taking advantage of them, right? So we have this 50 or 60 years worth of studies. Tobacco's been around a lot longer than that. But we know the effects, long-term effects of cigarette smoking. Well, cigarettes aren't cool anymore. We call them dialogue cigarettes. They stink. They turn your fingernails and your hair color. You can't shake them fast enough for the smoke to not go up over the bathroom stall. We've all tried. You can't get away with it. It's just too noticeable. So the tobacco industry said, well, maybe we need to do something. If they're going to quit smoking, we've got to figure something out, right? So they bought out the vape companies because they're digital. They're electronic. They can put skins on it. They can have wonderful smells. They're not trying to get me to smoke with Cinnamon Toast Crunch flavored stuff. They're marketing that directly to our kids, and they don't realize that. And something that we have found, this is my honest opinion. So we're in the middle schools and high schools. Actually, right now, at Burke Recovery, we're seeing 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders because they have violated the drug-free policy in Burke County Public School System. Most of that is vapes. Some of that is dab pens with THC, which we'll probably talk about also. One pod that goes in a vape, and that's the liquid that has the nicotine in it, is minimal 20 cigarettes worth of nicotine. So when these kids are hitting that one time, that is such a concentrated amount of nicotine that they're actually getting high off of it. So, if you've ever smoked a cigarette, it might have made you a little lightheaded or nauseous or something like that. But that quick delivery of that intense amount of nicotine causes addiction to start happening a lot quicker. And we talk to the students and we're like, why do you think it's necessary? Oh, my anxiety's so bad. I can't think straight. I have to hit it. It calms me down. And we're like, no, those are withdrawal symptoms. So you're addicted to that nicotine already. That's why you're feeling anxious. And when you hit that vape, then you're giving your withdrawal symptoms what they need. So you're actually just feeding that addiction more, and they don't realize that.
All right.
It sounds to me, I mean, when you look at it from spiritual perspective, it's the enemy conspiring to basically take out a generation of people with something that smells like Fruity Pebbles. You know, it is diabolical. Yeah.
I would say more than half of the students, even in our sixth grade through 12th grade, if they're not smoking regularly with a vape, they've at least tried it, or they're doing it at school with their friends. It used to not be that high. Maybe 2019, when we first started hearing about it, the numbers were much lower, but now you barely don't get a student to raise their hand who hasn't at least tried it.
Wow.
Okay, I want to touch on something that Pastor George mentioned earlier about when he was in D.C. and he asked, and they said, oh yeah, it's legal here. Now, so if I say kids or young people, whichever one, it is what it is. It's just going to come out that way. But you hear young people, you hear adults even, their thing is, well, it's legal. So if it's legal, there's nothing wrong with it. And we saw a story, when I say we, my wife and I saw a story that talked about the thing now is wine and how wine companies are marketing to women. And so there are a lot of women who are drinking wine and they're becoming addicted to wine. They show moms on playgrounds, and they have their sippy cups, as they call them, on the playground and on play dates. And, you know, they have the shirts made and little cute aprons, and it's in disguise as cute, and just kind of take the edge off, relax a little bit. But again, it's something that's legal. So what are you all seeing? Even though it's legal, how is it still showing up and causing chaos?
I think one of the things we point out first is just because it's legal doesn't mean it's good for you. You know, can alcohol be dangerous, and can it be bad for you? Can it be addictive? Yes, but it's legal once you become a certain age. Same thing with cigarettes. I mean, 70% of all substance-related deaths every year are from smoking-related deaths. That's more than all the other substances put together.
What was that percentage again?
70%. And there's around 580,000 deaths related to substances each year, and smoking-related is 70% of that. That's something else that we talk about. You don't see it immediately. It's not like, you know, methamphetamine where you get sores and you lose weight drastically and things like that. It's working on the inside of your body and causing those problems. But we get that a lot, especially with THC, marijuana. It's a plant. It's safe. It's natural. We have rebuttals for all of those, yes, but the most important thing, I think, is just because it's legal doesn't make it safe. And you would be surprised what folks who want to put money in their pocket will sacrifice of your life and your health to line their pockets with money. So I think it's important to point out that there's really, you know, if you follow the trail of money, that's what it goes back to.
Yeah. Were you about to say something, Lee?
No.
No, I was thinking when you said that, and I think it's across the board throughout history, throughout mankind. You know, Scripture says the love, the commitment to money is the source of all evil. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but that commitment to it, some people would sell their mother and their father for the purposes of money, and so when you've got someone trying to make money, they don't care what it is. You know, if you die, what is that to them? They just fill their pockets. And I think those are the things that people don't. There is a money trail, as you just said, and I think it all lines up with, you know, the love of money is the root of all evil. Not money. Right. Money can do some wonderful things, but the love of it, the commitment that I'll kill you for it. That's so if you got something like you said, like a substance that you can, I mean, it's like the best business plan ever. You know, you get them hooked on it, and then you sell it to them until they die.
Exactly.
That's, yeah.
Well, Lee, I want you to talk about this one, okay? I remember growing up, and you'd see movies where they would, it's supposed to be like a comedy, and they'd like have brownies, and they put the marijuana in the brownies, and it'd be a funny scene because of all these people eating something that's sweet or cookies. But nowadays, it seems like there's so many products that have, what is it? Would you say THC?
THC, yeah.
Right. So can you talk to us and tell us about what are some of the things that seemingly are innocent, but a lot of the young people are using nowadays?
So I can actually tell you specific here to Burke County. So in 2018, they passed a farm bill, and because of it, they are allowed to put up to 3% THC into hemp products, which are legal here in North Carolina. Because this is a loophole, realtors figured out how to extract all of the THC out of the hemp. That is your Delta 8, 9, and 10 products that you see here in Burke County. Usually you'll see it on a little flag flying out in front of the store, or it's lit up in the store things. That has THC in it. It will cause you to fail a drug screen. It is habit forming. It is the exact same thing. I just lost my train of thought.
Okay.
Where did I go? What was the question?
The question was,
Rephrase my question.
tell me some of the things. I talked about the brownies,
yes.
but what are some of the things
I'm so
that
sorry.
we're taking nowadays?
It's been a long day.
That's
I've been
fine.
at work since 7:30. So here in North Carolina, or Burke County, what we're seeing is those gummies and those brownies and candy bars and caramels are already here. And we do have stores in Burke County that sell to underage. So what we're finding out is our youth are going in and they are buying these and they are taking back to school, and they're not telling their friends that the gummy bears and the gummy worms that they just bought have the Delta 8, 9, or 10 in it, which is causing reaction in other youth. We're having overdoses, and when we say overdose, we don't always mean death. A lot of people don't know that there's two different kinds of overdoses. So you can die from an overdose, or you can get just really, really sick from an overdose, and that's what we were seeing. So the kids are having high heart rate, their blood pressure is going up, they're throwing up, passing out, hallucinating, seeing things that are not there, and that's what we're experiencing. And it's just super, super scary when it happens to a kid. We've also run into children that have said they thought it would be funny to bring it to school and give it to their friends that don't do anything because they wanted to see them high. So unfortunately, when we go into school and we teach wasted and stuff, we have to tell kids, if it's not an original bag where you can see the ingredients on it and see that it's troll gummies, don't take anything from your friends that's not in a wrapper.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
Because when I spoke to you all, you said something when we were in the gym that you mentioned it earlier, Brandy, that the amount of THC. Did I say it right? I just said okay.
Tetrahydrocannabinol, that's what it stands for.
But you said back in the days, say high school for us, that was the 3%.
Yep.
But now you say it's how much?
99% or more. That's something I was going to make mention of. So, North Carolina recently passed medicinal marijuana, and we're getting, and it always is a slippery slope to recreational marijuana becoming legal. It's not your granny's weed. It's not the stuff that, and when I was smoking in the 90s, around 3% THC, now that states have had it legal for a few years, they have chemists and botanists, and they're cultivating designer lines of marijuana, and the THC level is nowhere near natural. So it's not like the dirt weed that we used to smoke. 99% THC, and not just that, but they use other chemicals to extract it from the bud or the flower, things like butane and other harmful chemicals that don't make sense for us to huff, but we do. And then when they drain that out of there, it becomes wax or butter or shatter, and that is just concentrated THC. That's what they're putting in the dab pens or the things that they're smoking now, the hookahs and stuff. Let's see. Marijuana used to be in a classification of drugs called depressants, like alcohol. Around 2016 or 2017, when the THC levels began to get so high, they changed it into the classification of hallucinogens like acid and mushrooms. And that is what we're experiencing. We have kids who take 3 hits off of a dab pen and they're in the hospital because they put their head through a computer monitor because they thought their hair was on fire. I mean, it's just not what we're used to. And the young people think it's what we used to have. And then when they experience it, it's just so much more, it's so much stronger, more dangerous.
Well, thank you.
And so, listening to all that you've said, how big of a problem is substance abuse here in Burke County? Are we talking about just a few people? Or are we talking about this is like everywhere, all the time? What are we talking about?
Well, I will say we have a very close relationship with our sheriff here in Burke County. Former Sheriff Wisnett and now our previous Sheriff Heinzman, current Sheriff Heinzman, and both of them, we went to them and said, hey guys, if you could give us just a percentage of like substance use related crimes here in Burke County, what would it be? The answer has always been around 90%. If that tells you how much substance use is prevalent here in Burke County. I mean, it's very evident if you look at the arrests weekly. And I would say, I would hate to put a percentage on Burke County substance use because we talk to kids whose parents use that you would never think that those parents in this community would. It's very well hid. The child knows not to talk about it. So would you give a percentage if you would say Burke County?
When I was in college, the rule of thumb was 1 out of every 10 people suffers from substance use disorder, which is a little bit heavier than just, social use or regular use or habit. But things are different now, especially as the opioid crisis has progressed. That is one that is so hard for folks to put down, and the methamphetamine too. It just really blew up. It's always been there, but it just began to get more popular. And I don't know if it's, things that are happening in our country. People are, since the dawn of the ages, folks have been looking for a way to escape reality. But I would say we have many more than 1 out of 10 here in Burke County. It's very prevalent, and it's in our elementary schools, it's in our middle schools, it's in our high schools, it's in our grandparents' homes, it's in our businesses. I mean, it's everywhere. I used to hear people say about cancer, everybody knows somebody who's been touched by cancer, and I'm quite sure that it's substance use now. Everybody knows somebody who's been affected by it.
Yeah. Ma'am, I know you've got some good questions left, but I was thinking in all sensitivity to people who may have lost their loved one due to an overdose, and because you hear of a 26-year-old who died, unexpectedly, and I think we probably all know a family that has probably had someone pass due to drug abuse or drug overdose, and forgive me if I'm not using the proper language, but speak to the reality of that. When someone passes, a child 20, 21, 22, or even younger, what's causing that? You hear the word, and I don't know a lot about it, but fentanyl, I'm sure you're going to get to that at some point maybe. But what is that? Tell us about what's causing that, because it seems like there's a rash of it. Like sometimes on a weekend you may have 2 or 3 people that die. Can you speak to that?
Fentanyl is the most dangerous thing we're facing right now. It got really popular around 2019. We started seeing it in the United States around 2016.
Yes. For people who may not know exactly what fentanyl, I think everybody's probably heard the term, but what exactly is fentanyl? So
just a quick bit of history. Opiates or painkillers, opiates come from the poppy plant. Started, something natural. As those things like morphine and heroin became more popular, then they began to create synthetic forms of opioids. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. So when it gets in the system in our bodies, or naturally our brains have neurotransmitters that we produce, endorphins, and so our body is programmed to take those and use them. Fentanyl is so strong that its purpose, it's a respiratory depressant, so it slows down our heartbeat, slows down our breathing, which are both very important to being alive. It takes a very small amount. We talk about milligrams. If you take Tylenol, you take 1,000 milligrams at a time. If you take ibuprofen, maybe 400 milligrams at a time. When you're talking about fentanyl, we're talking about 2 or 3 milligrams to kill a full-grown man that doesn't have a tolerance to it. You don't see that hidden in something. You don't know your joint's laced with it. You don't know that you open the car door and the person had it in the car, and just by breathing it, it can cause overdose. It's just deadly.
So 2 milligrams.
Yes.
Wow.
It looks like a couple grains of salt. When we go to the schools, we try to take the packets of salt and have the kids to pour it out in their hand, and we're like, okay, take 2 or 3 of those and separate it. That's all it takes. It's that detrimental. And even now, you guys are probably going to start hearing about xylazine, which is a horse tranquilizer, which they are mixing with heroin and fentanyl now. Narcan doesn't work on it because it's not an opioid, it's a tranquilizer, and so it's increasing the fatal overdose rates right now, and we have it here in Burke County. We've had quite a few cases of it already.
Wow.
I've got a lot of questions, so go ahead.
All right.
You know,
And Lee, you just mentioned a few minutes ago, you talked about you having parents who are using that you wouldn't think these parents would be using. On this broadcast, we talked about mental health before, but I kind of put this in that same category, and you correct me if I'm wrong, or talk about your experience in the sense that it's kind of taboo to talk about. Like with mental health, it's, we don't want to talk about that, or if mom is using or dad is using, we don't really want to talk about that, or if they have a drinking problem. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so a lot of times what we find is, of course, it's hush-hush. If you are a high society person, you're absolutely going to not want people to know your dirty little secrets. So that's where we find that a lot of things are hid behind that. And
I think, too, because it's painful. No matter who I am, I don't have to have any standing in the community. If I have a son who's addicted to drugs and has drug our family through pain and torment, and we worry every day if he's going to wake up the next day, and we're raising their children and things like that, those things are painful to us. And so we don't want to share that pain with everybody. And sometimes it's shameful, and we don't want other folks to find out about it. And what's in all actuality, lots of folks are dealing with it. I think the stigma associated with substance use, and you're right, mental health. So if you work in the mental health field, there's something called the DSM, which is how we diagnose mental health orders. Well, substance use disorder is in that. It is a mental health issue. And it's often associated with comorbid issues like other mental health issues. A lot of times they work together, and it's hard to know which one came first. If I had a mental health disorder and I started using substances to self-medicate, or if I had a substance use disorder and it has brought on early psychosis or anything like that, because they do. But stigma, we call people crackheads and drunks and meth heads, and those terms are harmful. They're painful. They hurt us. It's embarrassing. We're ashamed of those things, so we don't talk about it, which just keeps it further in the shadow. One of the things we try to do is talk about changing our language. So somebody would probably be mad at me for just saying those 3 words I just said. We want to show those folks respect. They're not a crackhead. They might be a person who has a problem with something, person first language, and that's something we work on. We hope that changing our language some will help reduce the stigma, and it will be easier to talk about and easier to get help with.
And I'll say what you didn't say, Brandy, because I think you were about to say it, but you were respectful of the church. I think that some of those stigmas come directly from the church. In other words, the sense of you got to be clean, you got to be whole, you got to be everything that Jesus came to do for us. We think we have to do it on our own. So admitting, accepting, talking about it in the context of church creates that stigma, so people won't come for that kind of help. And I think language is important, even with myself, to not even in jest to kind of say words that will kind of make a person who's challenged in that area to, I ain't gonna say nothing today. I'm challenged with that. So I think it's a good education for all of us to make sure that we're not stigmatizing, if I can use that word, people who really need help. And where else should they come? They should come to the church, smelling like weed or smelling like alcohol or smelling like whatever. One of the things that we do during the summer times, we have our crossover league, and it's really one of the special time of our church when we get to have young people from the community come in, and we know for at least a day and a half it's going to smell like weed. And we're great with it. We're glad for it because, we want them to know that the image that they have of Jesus may be the institutional Jesus, but not the same Jesus is out there on the street, in your addiction, in your challenge, in whatever type of thing they're challenged with. And some may not get delivered, but he's going to be right there with them, even in the midst of a hardship. And just, I appreciate that. That was, I think as a whole, I know I need to be more mindful of that. And I think everyone, because we can say things just to get a quick jest when someone's really going through it. And it ain't funny, it's hurtful. Yeah, so thank you.
And so, Brandy and Lee, along those lines, let's kind of turn the corner here. Okay, so we've talked about what all is out there, a lot of things that are out there, how harmful they are. So if someone has been listening and they say, that's me. I heard her say something about the addiction, or I can't seem to kick this habit, which is an addiction, and I want to get help. Now, so Burke Recovery helps with this. Okay, so if there's someone who comes and says, "Listen, I need help. I want to be in the program." What does that look like? Is there a typical treatment program that they would be placed into, and what does that look like exactly?
So that would depend on what kind of situation they're coming from. We never turn anyone away if you're not able to pay, and I think that hinders a lot of people from getting help, because I know there are a lot of treatment facilities that turn people away if they don't have any help. But we do take Medicaid, we have a sliding scale, and we take you in if you can't pay. But we got to bring you in and do an assessment for you. And when our counselor does that assessment, she's going to give you what she suggests. Sometimes it's mental health. Maybe you don't need to come get substance use treatment. If you do, she's going to give you certain hours that you need to complete. And like Brandy mentioned earlier, we offer individual counseling. If you're trying to mend fences with your family, you're welcome. We open arms, bring your family in. We want to help mend families and stuff. So you really got to come in and get that assessment for us to be able to navigate you the different paths that we have at Burke Recovery. But we will, even if it's out of county, we have tons of resources, and we will connect you to those resources and get you there.
Okay. And you mentioned something that's very important, I believe, because I've heard stories of someone who maybe was addicted, and they burned all the bridges with mom, dad, family members, and the family, they don't want this person around, don't let them in the door, we don't want to see them at family reunions. So how does that work? You have someone who comes and says, "Listen, I'm at rock bottom, I've done so many people dirty, I need help," but then you still have a mom who's still loving on their son or that daughter, and they want to be involved. How do you involve the family members or the loved ones in the treatment process? If someone is in that process of going through and again, I'm like Pastor George, I don't know the jargon exactly as far as, is it a program, is it a therapeutic plan, I don't know, but when someone's in that, are they still allowed to see mom and dad or son and daughter? How does that work?
Yeah, so after their assessment, they're going to get a treatment plan. And with that treatment plan, they can include things like that. Now, we have a men's residential facility. It's a 90-day facility. When they're in there, they're working on themselves and in the program. We still have, I think we have Friday night family time there.
Not until the last 30 days.
Oh, yeah, so not until the last 30 days, because we want them to focus on themselves and get healed. We encourage people, when they come to us, to find a sponsor, to attend NA or AA meetings, depending on what substance you're abusing, because you need to go ahead and start building from the ground up, and that's what's going to help you, because those first couple months are the roughest times. Those are going to be a tendency to have your relapses and stuff. You need to go ahead and form those bonds with sponsors and stuff that have been through it, and they can help guide you through it so you don't use. But yeah, we just find all different paths that we help people with. So it really just depends on that. If you come in and say, "My mom's not talking to me, I want to fix that relationship," when we direct you there, there's the 12-step program. So that really works on you and focuses on mending those bridges and stuff. So it really just depends on the person and the situation, what they're looking to get out of it, but we can make a treatment plan for that.
Okay. And then by the same token, do you have something for the loved ones to go through? Is there a class for them? Is there something that they go through? Maybe they don't want to be involved really, but the son or the daughter saying, listen, I'm really trying, I'm doing better. Can you talk to them for me? And those parents, is there something that they can go through to better understand what all of this is about?
There are a lot of options, actually, a lot of resources out there. I would encourage folks to maybe contact someone like from our Substance Use Coalition, because we're involved with many of the human service resources that are here in the county, and there are things like Al-Anon, which is for people who are affected by alcoholism, but it's not just for alcoholism anymore. It's for people who are affected by substance use. They have wonderful tools and programs. As a substance use treatment facility, our primary focus is the client who comes in with the problem. But I'm here to tell you, if that person gets better and goes back home to a dysfunctional household, chances of them staying clean and sober are much less. So we always encourage, bring your family with you. The clinician that we have is a licensed family, marriage. She's got alphabet soup behind her name. Really, I think she can do anything. But she encourages them, and we do have family nights, and we offer them reading material and other resources, and we are always happy to farm people out. You know, you need a referral for this, let me get you this information. You don't want anybody in Burke County to know, let me get you some information in McDowell or Wilkes County or Buncombe County, whatever they think will help. We are always encouraging that because it's such an important part of recovery.
I read something not too long ago recently, and it was talking about how habits are formed and how habits are broken. And it was talking about people who had fought in the Vietnam War, and many of them came back with heroin. I'm not ever sure. Some people say heroin, but you understand what I'm saying. But they would come back addicted to heroin. And he said that when those who came back into a loving family environment, it wasn't but days before they were off of it, as opposed to being in that environment. And so it sounds like a lot of it is really environmental. The drug usage, when you're going into where the people that you're around can greatly create the appetite for. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. So, we can be genetically predisposed, have it in our family and in our DNA, but studies have shown that if you are maybe adopted and your biological family had a substance use issue and you grow up in a different family, maybe you never experienced that because of your environment. So epigenetics are just as important as true genetic traits that we have, and it's so important. I have kids, and I'm pretty sure they'll hate me until they move out because I have to be mom all the time, but the people your children are hanging out with are developing their personalities. And peer pressure sounds so funny because we've talked about it for so many years, and it seems as adults we're in our 40s and 50s and we're like, who cares about peer pressure? But that is the most important thing to those kids right now. Image, reputation, all of those things. And I will also mention that the internet has made it, it doesn't even take any effort to get substances. You don't have to be a certain age. You just have to know the key words to type in, and somebody will walk to your house and bring it to you. So I think it's important to really keep an eye on our adolescents.
Okay. Well, as we're winding down, I'd like to know, so we talked about getting into a treatment plan. We talked about coming out and coming out of that treatment plan and going back home or going back to an environment that is a positive or negative, and then how that can affect the person. What kind of support is available in case someone does relapse? And I want to ask that question, but then also, Brandy, you shared your personal experience already. I don't know if you want to share anything about, again, I'm just speaking from the movies, I'm sorry, as far as you'll see people who 3, 4, 5, 10 times they've gone back and forth to rehab. So what does that look like? What type of support is there if someone does relapse?
So that happens quite often, more than not. It's kind of expected. That's why we are so strong on, I will tell you, we didn't touch on Burke Recovery as an abstinence-based program. We're the only one here in the county, so we believe in working the 12 steps. Not that we don't believe in other paths, because people do need medically assisted treatment or therapy to get off substances, but we just believe in the 12 steps, and so we encourage that sponsorship. You have to find somebody to connect with that's been in the same place as you so they can help guide you. And then we start encouraging them to find friends that are in recovery. You know, when you go to those NA and AA meetings, that's where you build the friendships that's going to start your recovery journey. And when you do relapse, those people aren't going to turn you away. They're going to welcome you back with open arms and say, it's all right, man. I done it once, I done it twice, I done it 3 times, and here I am. We're also like that with our Flynn Community Center. Did I say it right?
Flynn Recovery Community.
Flynn Recovery Community Center. We welcome people back. If you come through our 90-day facility and you really wanted it the first time and you didn't have no other option to go back to the place that you came from, and that was a bad place. That's where the substances were, and you relapse, and you call us and you say, hey, I really want to come through there again, and this time maybe they're from Buncombe County, and they say, I'm going to stay in Burke County, I'm going to start over, find a job, new friends and everything. We welcome them back. We are just as much as supported as anybody else. We have never turned people away. We've had people come in 3 years later and just want to give us an update about their life. We are very strong in our recovery community here.
And do you have statistics on relapse? Like what percentage?
Sadly, recidivism rate is over 80%.
Over 80%.
And I will mention in the last few years, the fatal overdose rate has increased exponentially because of the fentanyl, and what we find now is relapse is often a death sentence because either they've been incarcerated or they've been in some other institution, or even just have some time under their belt where they haven't used, so they've lost that tolerance, and the first time they use, they think they can use what they did before and they overdose, and it happens all the time. So relapse is just much more dangerous now than it ever was before.
And, you know, I think, you know, when we think about addiction and drug usage, and we talk about relapse, and we say that's, you know, it's common. Well, I think in the lives of all of us, we relapse. We relapse on Lay's potato chips. You know, like I'm trying to get off of Lay's potato chips, you know, or M&Ms or whatever the case may be. I don't mean to make light of it, but we should treat it more like that than, oh, that's terrible. How could you go back to that? You know, I think it's common, you know, but by the grace of God that we keep a straight course. And then at the same time, when we relapse in whatever thing that has had us trapped, he's like, all right, it's okay, come on, let's go. And taking the stigma off of the relapsing. And I think you all can speak and have already spoken to this, how detrimental shame is in the culture as a whole. The one receiving the shame and the one giving out the shame. You know, how people can, you know, to me, that's the greatest isolator and paralyzer is, you know, shame. And so one thing you didn't mention, and I would love to hear your answer on this, do you ever make recommendations of, you know what, as a resource, here's a church we know of. Do you do that? Because, I mean, and I'm not saying I'm saying it because the church, we have to kind of have a place where the walls don't look like walls anymore.
So, it's kind of a two-edged sword. When I went to college in my late 30s, because I was stupid way before then for a long time, we were told you don't share your faith with clients. You can't work here if you're going to profess your faith all the time, because I profess my faith because that's how I got off drugs. That's how I stay off of them. But what I can do if someone asks me what my journey was, if someone asks me what I think, and so what we've started doing so that we can slide it in there, because I can't tell you how many people I know are successfully navigating recovery. There's a spiritual aspect to it. Very few people that I know who are in long-term recovery have no relationship with Christ, or at least something they consider a higher power, but mostly Christ, because even the 12-step program is not a Jesus program. And I try to explain that to people, but it does encourage you to find something bigger than you that you can relate to and things like that. So we have to be careful how we recommend it. We can't just tell them to go to church, but we can suggest that they develop a spiritual relationship. Is that
No,
answer your
yeah,
question?
and what I would add to that, because I think in Christendom, sometimes we would, if I can say these words, we'd poo-poo on the 12 steps. Like, my thought is this: if it helps someone get from point A to point B, God is all in that. You know, God is in that process. Ultimately, the goal is to get people to know Jesus. Because ultimately and eternally, that's what matters most. But I think we poo-poo on things that are really helping people, and we get a little high-minded, I think, sometimes, and think that the only way to help them is the way we dictate. But I believe there's multiple ways, and one of those ways, of course, I believe is I believe that there is, if I may share this part, just from a spiritual perspective, we see in Scripture where there are demonic entities, there are demonic activity going on, and so as a believer, using the authority that God has given us through His Son's name, the name of Jesus, the character of that name, then we can all work together in this process. You know, no one has to be like, well, if you go to them, you can't come to us because we're superior. No, it's how do we use whatever's out there, because the enemy is not in to helping anyone. He doesn't want Burke Recovery or BSAN or he doesn't want any of those things that help people get to a place of being whole. And so how can the church come up under and help that, underwrite that, be a part of it, be an extension of the hand of God, I think is vitally important. I mean, this has really been good. Yeah. Thank you all. But it's not the end, but thank you anyway.
And so as we are ending here now, so Pastor George, I want you to speak to this from a pastor's perspective in the church, and I want you all to speak to this from a Burke recovery perspective. You know, we've talked about treatment and relapse and so forth, but what about people in the church, mom, dad, grandparents, brothers, sisters, who might say, you know what, you know, you're just acting stupid. That's just stupid. You just need to stop drinking. You just need to stop smoking. You just need to stop using. We prayed for you 3 times and you still want to do it. You just need to stop. And so what would you say about that, again, on both ends, where I've heard people just say, it's just that simple. You just simply need to stop. Stop smoking. Put it down. Don't touch it.
Y'all want to go first?
I wish it was that simple. I will tell you that the disease of addiction, and we do call it a disease now because it follows the disease model like other diseases that our bodies can get, and it's a disease of the brain. It's brain health that we're talking about. And substances that alter your brain chemistry. You guys ever heard of your snake brain? You know, the primitive part that was there way back when all we had to do was eat to live and run if something came after us. So that part that's been there so long, that's literally the pathway that substances use. They go straight there. And for a lot of folks who find themselves in active addiction, what has happened is when that goes to your survival brain, you think you have to have that to survive. It becomes more important than your children or your marriage or your spouse and things like that, because your brain is literally telling your body you have to have that. That's more important than everything else because that's what it affects in your brain. If it were just that easy, we would all just quit, you know.
And what about that language in the church, Pastor, who...
Well, it reminds me of a story. When I lived in Los Angeles, we'd go down to what was called the Harbor Light Mission, and there would be people on the streets there. And Harbor Light Mission was a recovery center as well. And so when I was there in the 90s, early 90s, crack was real big, and it was the drug that was eating up inner cities. And I asked someone one time, I said, you know, tell me, what is it like to be addicted to crack? And this woman looked me straight in the face, and she said, you'll do anything for it. Anything. Period. And that just gave me the reality of how powerful it was. And so I would say to your question, I'm getting like leave now. What is the question? What's the question
When
here?
someone says, for example, we prayed for you 3 times, you just need to stop.
Yeah.
You just need to don't pick it up. You don't smoke. You just need to stop. It's that simple.
Well, a couple of things come to my mind. Number one, the Bible says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. So that means that the mind is malleable. It can be changed. It can be transformed. It can be shaped. It can be shaped by, I think, environment, by words, by people, obviously by drugs as well. And so that comes to mind, that we can't leave people just to their own devices. There has to be an environment where people can have their minds renewed, that new things can happen in their minds. But secondly, the language of disease doesn't offend me as a Christian, because Jesus said this. He says, by his stripes we were healed. Healed of what? Healed of all diseases. So it's a matter of receiving that by faith, like that we have an answer for addiction, because it's in the category of not only demonic entity, but it's in the category of disease as well. And I think when we see it as a disease, then we separate the disease from the person. You're not what you do. That's not who you are. The things we do is not who we are. So we can approach it. I think that our angle can be a lot different than seeing them, as a leper and in a leper colony over there and just stay over there with all the rest of the lepers. No, Jesus went into the daggone leper colony. He went there, he went there to people who were diseased. And I just think we have to, myself included, have to be more open to going to where the lepers are and letting them know that it's okay. We don't see you as this or that. Can I just add one more question? I know we're about to go, but how much of the, we hear a lot of talk about the transient and the homelessness in our community. How much would you say is that drug related? Lot, little?
Well, I would say a lot.
A lot.
I don't want to be unfair and say that every homeless person has a substance use, because I have run across several that are just down on their luck.
Mm-hmm.
They can't afford housing right now because rent is outrageous in apartments, and they choose to live in a vehicle or a tent. But I would say a lot.
And if not that, mental health. Yeah.
Mental health.
They
So-
can't maintain their own place.
So I close with this statement here on that. Every means necessary to bring wholeness to a person's life, to me, is the answer. Jesus being the most important piece in that answer. But I believe if Jesus were here, and we see this all the time in his life, he took care of them first, and then he shared with them who he was. The woman at the well, he began to share with her first, how she can, aspects of her life. And then he unveiled himself. And so I think the unveiling is not at the beginning. The unveiling is after I've ministered to your needs. And then we unveil Jesus, because now that they're like, who is this dude? Who's this dude that told me all about my life, and cared and showed concern and compassion. So, yeah.
All right. Well, Brandy and Lee from Burke Recovery, we want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And you shared a lot of information, maybe some things that those who are in the audience, maybe we didn't know, or those who are watching online kind of gave us some things to ponder and to act on, perhaps. So we want to thank everybody for joining us tonight on Let's Talk About It. We are done for this broadcast, but we'll see you next time.